Hi, I'm Nate Seberg, and this is One Day Ahead. Welcome to Of Mice and Men, Chapter 6. Reminder, this is not a spoiler-free video. Fair warning, but if you're good to go, then take off your hat and look over there as we dive into Of Mice and Men, Chapter 6. The final chapter in Of Mice and Men opens like all of the others, with a tour through the scene before the action starts, but this one has a twist. In Chapter 1, we met a little water snake which slipped along on the pool, its head up like a little periscope. Well, now our little friend is back, but this time he is visited by swift and unseen death. A water snake glided smoothly up the pool, twisting its periscope head from side to side, and it swam the length of the pool and came to the legs of a motionless heron that stood in the shallows. A silent head and beak lanced down and plucked it out by the head, and the beak swallowed the little snake while its tail waved frantically. In the biz, we call this foreshadowing. Lenny turns up. This is the place George told him to hide if he gets in trouble. As he waits, Lenny begins to hallucinate. The first vision is of Aunt Clara. A little fat old woman, she wore thick bullseye glasses, and she wore a huge gingham apron with pockets. She scolds Lenny in Lenny's own voice, but interestingly, it's about what a burden he has been to George. All the time he could have had such a good time if it wasn't for you. He would have took his pay and raised hell in a whorehouse, and he could have sat in a pool room and played snooker, but he got to take care of you. Lenny moaned with grief. Notice that in all of Lenny's self-flagellation, the murder he just committed, it never comes up. George does, the rabbit gets a mention, Ketchup features prominently, but never the murder. Steinbeck is showing us that the enormity of this act just hasn't registered for Lenny at all, outside of I've done a bad thing. Suddenly, Aunt Clara is gone, and in her place, there came a gigantic rabbit. It sat on its haunches in front of him and waggled its ears and crinkled its nose at him. The rabbit begins berating him too, telling him again and again that George is going to beat him with a stick and leave him. Lenny cries aloud for George, covering his ears and rocking, and in that moment, real life, not hallucination George walks quietly out of the brush. They are alone by the river together, the same place they started this book, and Lenny has done another bad thing. And their conversation is heartbreaking because Lenny knows how this is supposed to go. They have a script for this. We saw it in Chapter 1. It's a ritual between them, and from Lenny's point of view, these are the words we need to say to make it all right again. George is supposed to yell at him. Lenny is supposed to threaten to live alone in a cave. Then George is supposed to tell him their bedtime story about the ranch, the rabbits, and a world where they look after each other. That's the ritual. That's what sets the world right. But for some reason, George's heart just isn't in it this time. Lenny said, "George, yeah? Ain't you gonna give me hell?" "Give you hell?" "Sure, like you always done before. Like, if I didn't have you, I'd take my $50. Well, ain't you gonna say it?" George shook himself. He said woodenly, "If I was alone, I could live so easy." His voice was monotonous, had no emphasis. "I could get a job and not have no mess." He stopped. "Go on," said Lenny. "And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go to a cat house." He stopped again. Lenny looked eagerly at him. "Well, I can go away," said Lenny. "I'll go right off in the hills and find a cave if you don't want me." George shook himself again. "No," he said. "I want you to stay with me here." Lenny said craftily, "Tell me like you done before." "Tell you what?" "About the other guys and about us." George said, "Guys like us got no family. They make a little stake and then they blow it. They ain't got nobody in the world that gives a hoot in hell about them." "But not us," Lenny cried happily. "Tell about us now." George was quiet for a moment. "But not us," he said. Because I got you and I got you. We got each other, that's what. That gives a hoot in hell about us." Lenny cried in triumph. As the shouts of the other men draw nearer, George asks Lenny to take off his hat and look off across the river so Lenny can better imagine how it's gonna be. And as George paints with his words, speaking of a little ranch with animals, alfalfa, and rabbits, as he talks of a paradise where everyone is kind and there's no trouble and no hurt, George raises the gun he stole from Carlson last chapter, the gun Carlson assumed was stolen by Lenny. Lenny said, "I thought you was gonna be mad at me, George." "No," said George. "No, Lenny, I ain't mad. I never been mad and I ain't now. That's a thing I want you to know." Lenny begged, "Let's do it now. Let's get that place now." "Sure, right now. I gotta. We gotta. And he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hands steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. The crash echoes through the hills. There is the sound of running, then the other men burst into the clearing. Each of the men have their reaction. Curly is victorious. Carlson is confused because if you wrestled the gun away from him, then how did you shoot him in the back of the head? But it's Slim to pay attention to because he alone understands fully what George has done here. He takes George by the elbow and gently guides him away. You had to, George. I swear you had to. Come on with me. And as they recede into the distance, a devastated George supported by Slim, Carlson turns to Curly and wonders aloud, now what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys? And that's Of Mice and Men. So if we really want to understand this book, we gotta get deeper than just plot. Let's do a little analysis. First up, I think it's a really nice touch from Steinbeck that we get to slip into Lenny's mind as he hides on the bank. This could have played like a funhouse mirror, slightly exploitative, get a look at how crazy this guy is passage, but instead it serves a purpose. We get to see, in case we didn't believe it already, that he has no malice in his heart. It's like the last chapter where he takes the body of the puppy with him after he's just killed Lulu. We see that these events have not registered for Lenny beyond the rather broad category of I did a bad thing. Shades of Grey just do not exist for Lenny. This is admittedly overdone in the book, but it's necessary because the ending will not land like it does if there's any part of you that's happy when Lenny is killed. Which brings us to the killing, the murder. Are we using that word? Are we using the word murder? Well, this, friends, is the crux of the book, the inherent and brutal contradiction and the debate you are meant to have. What are we supposed to do with what has transpired here? And you can see what Steinbeck has done to us. He has put his reader in a box from which there is no escape. We have Lenny, blameless yet dangerous, a man who has done this terrible thing through no fault of his own. If you don't believe me, just ask the giant rabbit in his head. Then we have Curly, unhinged, cruel, and out for blood. We have no doubt he will catch up and kill Lenny in a sadistic, creative, and drawn-out fashion. Then we have George, a man who can see the whole board and is forced into making a terrible and tragic decision. So what should we do with this? Are we ready to say that it was right, that this was the right decision? Was this decision to murder a clearly disabled man the morally right thing? I can't even say that out loud. It's horrifying. But yet doing nothing may be more horrible still. I told you, Steinbeck has put us in a box. Now, friends, let me level with you here. There are two strains of criticism that generally accompany this novel and are worth exploring, both of which are valid for our discussion. The first is the way this book treats Lenny from the outset as something less than human. Someone less than human. That's not great. You will have noticed that he is framed throughout, again and again, in animalistic terms, like this. Slowly, like a terrier who doesn't want to bring a ball back to his master, Lenny approached, drew back, approached again. Lenny walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. Through these quotes and many others, we are primed to think of Lenny the same way we think of Candy's dog, as not quite fully human. And this priming sets us up to receive the events at the end of this novel in a way that we otherwise never would. And personally, I think there is something to this critique. Steinbeck knew what he was up to in animalizing Lenny countless times over 106 pages, probably did have an effect on me. Like, how could it not? I just called Lenny something. God, that's bad. Do I have to leave that in here? I think I do. I can't measure it. I'm not willing to say my moral position would be markedly different without all those animalistic references, but I've been tricked too many times by author shenanigans to think that I'm somehow immune. And my willingness to think of Lenny as a thing, or more generally as something closer to a dog, is bad. It's a bad thing about me. I should be better. The critique is that readers let the humanity of Lenny slip away over time, and are thus little better than the uncaring, hard-edged, selfish characters that populate this novel. And again, I think I am here for this argument. So that's the first one. The second criticism that I need to tell you about is more subtle, and in my opinion, less valid. The second criticism basically says that we spend way too much time thinking about George and not enough time thinking about Lenny. Following this novel, classrooms the world over focus exclusively on the morality of George's decision, and that framing itself is evidence that we have stripped away Lenny's humanity. When it was the dog, we hurt for Candy. Now Lenny is the dog, and we hurt for George. Where are your tears for Lenny? Now, I have less patience for this argument for two reasons. The first is that Lenny didn't get a choice or take an action here. In a tragic way, he's just along for the ride. This is a brutal sentence, but there is no evaluation of what he did in this chapter because all he did was die. Ugh. And the second is that conversations don't dwell on Lenny because there is simply not much to say. It's sad, it's so sad. And I only have so many synonyms for tragic. So conversations don't head that direction naturally, not from some hidden bigotry against the disabled, as I've seen claimed, but because that path only goes in a small and very depressing circle. Either way, that is the debate, and it's been going on for 87 years. So welcome. I don't want to tell you what to think about Lenny, about George, about his decision to pull the trigger. But I do hope that wherever he is now, Lenny spends his days tending to the rabbits. And that, friends, is Of Mice and Men. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out the Of Mice and Men teaching video series available at onedayahead.com, where you can also find my other series on other books. Thanks again. We'll see you next time on One Day Ahead.